I hope I'll give you some insights and knowledge and perspectives on the future. This talk about BACnet and IoT is largely going to be a talk about the future. What we can see into the future, I call it futurology. Some of it highly predictable, some of it totally inscrutable, some of it going to take us entirely by surprise. But the two technologies are now both in the ascendancy. I have a pretty good feeling about both of them. And I'm going to try to give you some perspective on how each affects the other. The point of view that I bring for BACnet, I've been doing it going on 20 years. I've seen it, a lot of others comers come, and I've seen a lot of other comers fade by the wayside. I'm pretty sure that IoT is not suddenly the silver bullet that's going to kill off BACnet. It's a technology that's got a long-lasting heritage. It's got fundamentals that are, I believe now, unassailable. I think BACnet will be technology that will be in use in the built form of our grandchildren, perhaps our great-grandchildren. We do have a little 2154 problem, but that's probably our great-great-grandchildren. But I totally see that BACnet has got a huge future and a long-lasting future. IoT, I'd call it approximately 15 years old now. Maybe that's even a stretch. But it's, I would even say, one of BACnet's better up-and-coming contenders, comers. Some of the things that I find that make BACnet, one of the things I worried about is whether the alignment on my screen and the alignment on this screen would be the same, but no, I mean, you're losing one line, but I can live with it. It's always been interoperable from almost the first demo that it had back in the mid-90s. Success in its interoperability and the different implementations was remarkable. It's now, by its 20-year, 25-year, going on 30-year history, if you count the pre-standard era, definitely enduring many, many implementations, and many, many of the contending market segments have recognized BACnet is here for the long term, a good bet, a solid bet, a conservative bet. It's also really benefited from never having taken a closed approach, open to multiple implementations, doesn't have a specific reference standard, doesn't have a prepackaged delivery that you must license. The openness seems to be one of its strengths. It's also quite self-discoverable. From any node on the BACnet network, you can largely find how to reconnect with the other peers. As a technology for sharing of information, it's really about communicating from one node to another. It's not about whether the information in the system is valuable makes BACnet valuable. It's whether BACnet can get the information from one node to another. The information either is or isn't valuable. BACnet makes it so that it travels. It's interconnected. One of the things I'd say is in BACnet's minus column is that the particular topological technology we've used makes it so a lot of things seem to look like you've lost connectivity. It's possible for other approaches, I'd call them, to maybe make this better, a little bit more abstraction. We might find that when communication is not taking place, we might have a better granularity for understanding why. Whether addressing is what's the problem or congestion is what's the problem. For BACnet, a lot of it always looks the same. Another thing about BACnet that's in the, I think the market now perceives it as a minus column, that it's not centrally configured. You tend to be able to make your connections peer-wise. Things like our recipient lists, if that isn't too nerdly and deep in the details. And the individual subscriptions for change of value are almost always initiated peer-to-peer, not centrally. There's a now, as the network world has moved into widespread use over the 25 years since packetized routable networking came out of the DoD and I can't remember the special projects. The ability to create the configuration, to put it up on one office wall, is often considered a plus, not a minus. The Internet of Things, which I would describe as the use of IP technology in a self-contained, addressable location with a physical location in the world, is, I have to admit, one of BACnet's better contenders. The ability to be addressable has overcome a lot of similar technologies or contenders. It absolutely scales with the potential for installations that would even dwarf BACnet's numbers. You could have thousands easily, 10,000s potentially, on a single site with manageable amount of addressing. The IP technology in use now in billions of devices has really refined the ability to address and intercommunicate with address resolution, with routing, with congestion control, with guaranteed connectivity. So the Internet of Things, by adopting IP, really has a real shot at being a good contender for a technology for transfer of information from place to place. And I actually am hoping that makes both the world better and BACnet better, because the direction I see it going is that largely what any given really good protocol will do, another protocol can aspire to or adopt. The other thing about IoT is that right now it's a little bit amorphous. There's a lot of references to IoT, almost like there's a thing that used to be called greenwashing, where if green is good, then my product's green. With IoT, it's so good that everybody just presumes that they ought to put that on their product line or on their service offering. It's not actually so amorphous that an engineer can't tell you whether something is or isn't using IoT, but it comes pretty close in the mainstream press that IoT is everything that's good. One of the other peculiarities about IoT, and especially as it comes to how IoT affects BACnet, is that IoT is almost always, I'm trying to see based on that whether that's, oh, there we go, okay. The IoT is almost always wireless, and BACnet is almost never wireless. The wireless dichotomy has surprised me. I've been an engineer for going on 30 years. I had my first wireless device in 2000. I guess I first saw one in 1999 when a friend had an Apple Airport in their apartment when I went to play poker at his house. And he was just flabbergasted that he didn't have to have an Ethernet to connect his laptop to the internet while he was showing it off to us while we were playing poker. He was just able to walk around the table carrying his laptop and stay on the internet. I went back home and looked online, and yeah, this 802.11 thing seemed to be a real thing. And my wife had a Mac laptop, so we got her the wireless card too, and got an airport. It seemed like the best thing since sliced bread. I really am a big fan of wireless, and I carry 3 wireless devices on my person at all times now. The IoT took that direction. Almost all of the deployments I've ever heard of speak of doing it wirelessly, as their transport is going to be RF and not wireline. What's peculiar about that to me is not that, and that means it's better, as to, I can't quite yet figure out how did the divergence stay sustained for so long. As I mentioned, I first saw it in 1999 and first installed it personally in 2000. It's 18 years later, and still there's 2 worlds, the wireless world and the wired world. And I don't know how it's going to play out. That's the one aspect of how is IoT going to affect BACnet, which is a complete mystery to me. It might be that one of them does finally adopt the other. It might be one of them does see the advantages of the other. I'm really not sure how that one's going to play. This is what I missed. After recognizing that IoT is so good, there's another aspect of it, though, that's kind of pernicious. It has actually already been exploited, and it may be that it's going to continue to be exploited. That IoT went with an approach which was so commoditized, I guess would be the word I'd look for, that there have been successful exploits that use garage door openers and baby monitors to reinstall a distributed denial of service botnet. It's a unusual architectural result. I think it comes from having put a little bit too much single approach to configuration. That once you're wireless and you try to reduce your parts count to having just a good wireless card, you do configuration through it, you do dynamic addressing through it, and you do the ability to do software upgrades through it. Somehow this kind of made a confluence that allowed it to be exploited so that people who weren't supposed to be doing software upgrades across this single point of contact with the device could do so from anywhere in the world and could do so on a wholesale level. So the IoT revealed itself to have this kind of Achilles heel, that by taking the approach they did to almost all configuration going through their wireless interface, including the ability to rewrite the software firmware in themselves, lent themselves to the discovery and then the successful use of a deployed DDoS tech. But moving from that one dark side, IoT is really good at sensors. The ability to get past the deployment cost, I guess would be the phrase. You generally can put an IoT sensor where you need it. You can put it in the most valuable place, and you can put the number of them that would be valuable, and you can scale them for whatever granularity or whatever your budget. So IoT is really good for sensors, and yet also BACnet has, in its history, shown itself to be really good at sensors. I would say that of the BACnet devices I have seen, most of them are capable of sensing something about their environment. The inputs are as common as the actuators. The ability to manipulate the world or to give feedback or to provide information for making good management decisions about the health of your equipment or of the environment your equipment is in seems to be BACnet's sweet spot as well. I went looking for ways that IoT is maybe diverging from BACnet, and I saw that there was a talk recently, a couple of IoT startups describing their products and why IoT had been the winning choice for them. One of them is SteveIQ, the ability to monitor steam traps so that they don't have to be manually or only manually tested, but can be monitored from by electronic means continuously. So this Peter Owens made a presentation at MIT last month, describing how his product hopes to really move into this monitoring of steam trap industry due to being able to do it with a less manual sort of payroll cost, and the monitoring would be a displacement technology offering on cost. Another thing that IoT is good for has been the ability to collect information over time, or at least the way it is built is oftentimes you're collecting information so that you can see trends. Trends are not automatically going to make themselves seen. There's always a process of collecting the information, correlating it, finding its appropriate representation, and sometimes data massaging it. But I also find BACnet has often and always been good and strong in that area as well. Trending was not a fundamental in its very first few years, the 95 to 97, but trending was one of the 5 interoperability of areas of BACnet as early as 1997. I think the two of them are probably going to find common ground on that. I wish this was, yeah, you warned me about this, but I should always just use that, I'll probably be safer. The common ground is both of them are technologies for the collection of information from a wide variety of locations, and the proof of the pudding on whether they are good for trending will often be how it rolls up where the information is collected, aggregated, and analyzed. Again, from that, looking into what IoT is good for, I found this other presentation. VitaWorks is looking to monitor water and being able to just look at the water usage through a non-invasive technology IoT suggested themselves to them because they could just strap it onto the pipes. Never a drip, no cutting of the pipes, no need to provide the electrical service into a place where water is so clearly going to be present. Alex Chemetz Paul is the other guy. Alex Chemetz is thinking that his product is going to potentially be finding uptake in water monitoring using IoT on the billions of dollars scale. And it's interesting that the idea of trending is often also spoken by BACnet as the value proposition for much of the information that we gather. These parallels, IoT looking to be where the information could be valuably collected, and then claiming that being able to collect it there is the value. It parallels with BACnet. We trend, we sense, and we have the ability to move the information from one place to another. So in those senses, I think we're targeting the same value proposition, and neither one of them is showing any displacive superiority in that sense. Another of the other things, there are 4 areas that I found. IoT is really good at scheduling. Things like the ecobee thermostat, which I see on several of my friends' walls. It installs just by attaching to the wall with a long life battery. It gets configured onto their wireless router in the home, simply enough that even non-technical people can do it. It's designed for that 7-day-a-week, some multiple phases per day with manual overrides. But actually that's very much in the same wheelhouse as what BACnet scheduling has always aimed for, with 7-day-a-week scheduling, with the much stronger attention to multiple phases per day and not that much attention to calendars in the longer term. If you know what day of the week it is, you usually know much more about the person's activities or the building's uses than by what day of the year it is. The IoT bills itself as by being integrated with IT, and people with web browsers who just go to a site and do manual overrides of their ecobee or their oven or their toaster oven, or the ability to do things from a distance because they already have the IP technology to get to their home router. It's one of the chief features that IoT speaks of. And BACnet has actually also always been, with its connectivity, able to do a similar thing, not as much over a wide area network, but for the people who you do want to be making manipulations, usually within the campus, or where you have a full BACnet end-to-end connectivity between your controller or your maintenance office and the equipment itself. So BACnet in IoT, although IoT expands that to the ability to do it from a browser, with a gateway, which is not that topologically difficult, we can expand it easily to also using IP for those portions outside of the BACnet raw technology, and do instantaneous override from any location as well. The one place that I think IoT and BACnet are not that similar is that BACnet is considered challenging to configure, and IoT is considered simple to configure. I call it onboarding, where you take a device for the first time in your possession, and you are moving from there to the point when it's on a network. I think the user interface and the human factors that have gone into design of configuration and of addressing, especially the passage of the decades since BACnet was first specified until IoT picked up the baton, I think some real strides have been made. I've seen that oftentimes all it takes for an IoT device to become configured is a button is being pressed at the router at the time that the IoT device powers on. It just has a boot sequence of, I'm looking to become a configured self, and I'm advertising who I am and what my capabilities are. If I'm within radio 802.11 of something which is signaling that, yeah, that worked, or that took. And in order to keep it secure, it doesn't happen with any random router. But pretty much just a physical button press on the router is all it takes to put the router into a mode where it will be sending the corresponding side of the configuration sequence. But when I look at that, I also think nothing about that sequence is impossible for even BACnet configuration. It's just something that was thought of in the 2000s. It wasn't thought of in the 1990s. So I do believe that there will come a time when configuring BACnet devices is going to look a lot more like configuring IoT devices already does. But the question of how we didn't get there is, I think, only because the advances, most of them academic actually, in academia for moving human factors forward, and even the mention of the letters UX, user experience, which I didn't come across until about 2003, I think it was. I thought I was a human factors guy all the way back to 1985 when I attended SIGGRAPH. But human factors as a UX really seems to have taken off, and there's been a lot better thought put to it. And I don't think that ship has sailed. I think BACnet could have similarly simple deployment now. I want to address something that's another, I think, fundamental difference between IoT and BACnet, in that IoT devices are largely being pitched for places where electrical service is not going to be provided. The ability to run a device on battery is a win if you actually can come through with it. Many of the BACnet devices that I see are capable of battery, but almost all of them also lend themselves to wireline and sustained electrical service. The proposition of running on battery for years, especially running on battery for years if you are a radio transmitter, is one that I have a huge chip on my shoulder. I worked in power managed laptops as early as 1990, I guess. Yes, I worked on the AT&T Safari laptop. And I remember them giving us an energy budget. For this amount of watts, you could turn off the hard drive. And for this amount of watts, you could turn off the screen. And even for this additional smaller amount of watts, you could turn off the video controller so that it would actually lose its video VGA RAM, and you'd have to repaint the screen when you brought it back. They even talked about things like being able to slow the CPU speed down from the 33 megahertz down to 1 megahertz, or even down to 1 hertz, or even stopping the CPU. All of these things were for an energy budget. And largely after scoping all of that out in engineering terms, then they decided that no, what they really needed was for the battery people to do the better job. And just 2 years from now, they were sure batteries were going to be way better. Then we fiddled around for a while, and 2 years passed, and they were sure batteries were going to be better in just about 2 years, and we just needed to wait. And that was in the 90s. I'm still waiting for batteries to ever make that breakthrough that they're sure is going to be the solution, and why we don't need energy budgets on our battery-powered devices. I kind of think that may be an insolvable problem. Even if the batteries get better, I think that people will expect more of their devices and will leave them in higher energy consuming modes more as the battery lives get longer. There's going to be kind of an equilibrium between how long things running on battery can be expected to last. But it plays out in different ways, actually. There's not a necessity that everything running on battery stay working forever. It's in our industry especially, where we have a multi-decade sense of how long the equipment will stay in service, it's probably going to remain a wired and a wire service, electrically serviced set of BACnet devices. But in things which are remote sensors, or where the human cost of servicing them or even of changing the batteries, like things placed in the ceilings or placed in lamps, it's not necessarily the case that the end of the battery is going to be the problem relative to the end of the technology. Because sometimes the technology is going to actually go obsolete sufficiently close to the same time as the battery goes obsolete. So there's a trade-off in that sense. There's also, that's not the slide that I expected to be next, sorry. There's also the ability to get a sense of when the battery is going to need service by putting a battery sensor on the battery. On the other hand, putting a battery sensor on the battery itself is going to potentially mean that you need to sensor that battery. And all of it counts against the battery energy budget too. So the whole proposition of running on battery and never running on wired service is an IoT thing, and it's a proposition which is really, really frequently cited as how this is going to make all of our lives better. But I would urge a grain of skepticism. Another thing that was recently brought to my attention about the difference between IoT and its need for cryptographic protection on its single point of configuration is that often a lamp will last much longer, the technology will last much longer than the cryptographic interface itself will last. The time that you find out that your smart bulb in the ceiling could be turned on and off by somebody in Romania is not necessarily the time you swap out the bulb, because it's still a perfectly good bulb, and mostly your light isn't being turned off and on against your will. But the question kind of, although you can find technologies for which if the crypto is compromised but the technology is not, they're still valuable. A garage door opener, on the other hand, and if it's not somebody in Romania, but somebody who's just cruising your subdivision, seeing whose technology he can override from cracked crypto, do you have to admit that your smart device is past its end of useful life when it's cryptographically compromised, even if nothing else about the technology has been compromised? I was at a talk recently where this quote, security is the new expired filament. You can make LED lamps that last a very, very long time, but they might not last as long as the arms race between hackers and security professionals and implementations of crypto. And at the very same talk, if a device can't be upgraded, then when it's 5 years old, for the greater good, it self-destruct was came from the same talk where Rodney was speaking. I thought that was an interesting perspective on if it's not just that somebody else can take control of your smart device, but that the smart devices together can be used for a distributed denial of service harm. It is an interesting societal proposition to allow devices which can be upgraded, devices whose crypto can be compromised to continue to exist. And I don't have an answer for this one. This one is, again, a talk about how does IoT affect BACnet. It's just, these are the kinds of questions that are being opened by IoT's approach to both use of wireless and use of crypto and upgradability in the device, and also for commoditization. It seems to have become much more a practical consideration that a lot of the same manufactured device in IoT could be compromised in an intentional attack than to compromise BACnet on a large scale. So that kind of is all that I could plumb from my researches in IoT 2018, April, 2018, March, where I think there's still a cutting edge. It's a, sorry, I keep thinking as I look here that it'll be what you're seeing, but it isn't. What you get from IoT, I think, is some more modernized, quite clever, and genuinely useful advances in human factors. You certainly get the divergence in wireless versus wired. How that plays out, Duffy O'Craven, I cannot tell you. I'd love to hear other perspectives on that one. And you gain the extremely trendy. There's a lot of intellectual effort and creativity going into the IoT space. Places where a large sensor network could be deployed are suddenly striking people as worthwhile, worth founding companies on, worth doing the capital development. to be able to deploy large sensor networks. All of this, I think, actually favors BACnet in the long term, because just about anything that is great, BACnet can have too. So it's gonna, in my mind, be about taking the best of what we see in other technologies. BACnet has a fabulous continuous maintenance program. We're continually adapting, expanding the reach of our technology and making modifications and improvements in it. I think if you pair winning applications and the connectivity of either of these technologies, you win. So that's the direction I would very much predict IoT will affect BACnet. Displacing BACnet or BACnet ever displacing IoT. It's about the advantages of IoT and the advantages of BACnet, and whether there are winning solutions by deploying IoT because of its advantages. There's a friend of mine, Dave Fisher, who's frequently been touting this little gem out. And that really describes, I think, the advantages of IoT and what they do to BACnet. If we had IoT's advantages and we had this other thing, we could have this other thing if we had the advantages. So it's not so much about IoT and versus BACnet in my mind. I think it's about IoT showing a way and BACnet adopting that way when it's the better way. So I see both of them lasting for a very long time, and I look forward to it. Anybody got any probing questions about IoT, especially if they played in what I have looked into? Jim?
When BACnet was conceived, a fundamental goal was interoperability between different vendors' systems. But when I look at IoT, at least in the consumer space, I see these vendor-specific silos. At least that's my impression. So I'm wondering whether you see any meaningful attempts to build multi-vendor ecosystems, perhaps within a given application area that will be applied to what you would consider to be mainstream IoT.
At this point, 2018, I see it being primarily promulgated by the cloud vendors themselves. I've heard it described as Amazon has their IoT, and Azure has their IoT, and Alphabet has their IoT. So they do seem to realize that for the cloud proposition to pay off, they're going to need a lot of IoT points, sensors, physical objects, things worth having aggregated. But I concur with you. I don't think Ecobee is making any use of AWS, and I certainly don't think Azure is going to ever return the phone calls for the people over at Amazon. They really want to hope that they do win these, as though it's a Coke versus Pepsi war. But within their realms, I think they've got excellent developer programs, and they will tend to try to lock a large number of thousands of different developers into one approach to IoT in hopes that their clouds will be built. That's the obvious impedance match for aggregating the information.
I think what you just said is, yes, they want their own ecosystems, and that's the model for consumer IoT. And it's 30 years behind the model for buildings. And until that's bridged, the regular IoT concept is not going to work for people who are used to having things work together. It's just not. And in fact, I don't even like the word IoT when you talk about buildings. I don't think it applies. The industrial automation world had figured that out early, and they created their own acronym, right? Industrial IoT. And they've been using it for years now, and people know that means it's not that consumer thing. I've got an Alexa, I love it. But every once in a while, I ask it to do something that says I can't reach the server. Well, that is not going to work in my building. Thank you very much. And that means replacing all the batteries in my smoke detectors, my really smart smoke detectors every 5 years. I think that's great. You used to have to do it every year. In this building, put a battery in every sensor every 5 years? I don't think so.
No, I think they're going to wire it.
So the needs are different in buildings. So I believe we need to adopt a different acronym. We need to put a B in front of that IoT, whether it's a BACnet B or a building B. It needs to be a B in front of that IoT when we're talking about buildings. Or we'll set the expectations that come with the Amazon IoT or the Google IoT or the Microsoft IoT, or the Apple IoT. And we don't want to do one of those in our buildings if it means, oh yeah, you can only buy Apple stuff, or you can only buy Google stuff. That's not the model we built for 30 years now. We don't really need to go back there. My soapbox.
You talked a lot about batteries, and we've seen the battery have starting to get up to about 10 years now. Some of these sensors. A lot of the new things we're seeing now, when we're working with other different vendors, is energy harvesting.
Yes.
Kind of help us with that.
Yes.
And do you see that then? Is that one of your issues with the South Africa? Do you see that going away because of energy harvesting?
I would wish the energy harvesting takes off. I've been watching that for about half of the time I've been the VTL manager when EnOcean first started coming to the same ASHRAE conventions as I did. As an engineer, I think that one is correct. It does seem to require them to be sleepy most of the time. And some protocols just, especially BACnets, with their sense that you should always be reachable, and if you're not, connectivity has been lost, is the presumption. I think that's one of the places where BACnet will compromise, that we will first find a way to work with sleepy devices, and then energy harvesting devices will be inside our tent almost immediately.
Well, one of the ways that might happen, right, is there's another whole set of very low layer wireless stuff going on called Thread, which is trying to solve that exact problem, but in a way that just goes right underneath the IP stack. So any device that's running IP could run over that platform. That might be the ultimate wireless solution. Although each wireless solution has come along, it's not the ultimate one, so who knows. But people are understanding this sleepy device and how to solve that below the layer that BACnet gives with. Because that can be solved at a lower level. It doesn't have to be solved at the BACnet layer.
Driving up here, suddenly the thought occurred to me, well, what if you put a solar panel so that it picks up the room light? Can you recharge the batteries of the room from the light in the room?
There are thermostats.
Yeah, the thermostat needs a lot less energy than the lighting system. So yeah, let the thermostat harvest the lighting system inside buildings. There's another possibility. I would much more bet on that than I would bet on batteries lasting.
It's funny you say that, because we were working with a company that version of it was to have a solar panel, and we put it in the lights, and then all of a sudden I just went up to a source of light off, and what are we going to do now? So then they put super cap on it.
Yes, yeah.
It's good they ran into you first, and not somebody else who would be unhappy.
There are solar paneled all-night walkway lights in front of my house. I just think that's one of the most marvelous full-cycle technologies. And then it's so cheap. It's on the order of $1 per lamp along your walkway in quantity 12. So you get the panel, you get some amount of battery which might last 8 hours of the night. I mean, and you really don't really need it after like 4 a.m. Nobody's walking up your walk. You really just need the first 6 hours of the evening. But to be at the price point of $1 per lamp, I just think that's got real potential.